All right, we'll go ahead and get started, and folks can continue to trickle in. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's webinar, Stories That Shaped a Nation. My name is Spencer Cronin, and I am the Director of Educational Partnerships at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston. At JCRC, our education work focuses on supporting K-12 schools and districts in cultivating environments that are welcoming, safe, and inclusive for Jewish students, and where anti-Semitism is understood, treated as unacceptable, and addressed. An important part of creating welcome and inclusive spaces for Jewish students is finding ways to celebrate Jewish culture throughout your school community. One great opportunity to do so is by marking Jewish American Heritage Month, which takes place in May of each year and is a way to celebrate the contributions that Jewish communities have made to American history, culture, and society from our nation's founding to the present. Too often, students only learn about Jews in the context of persecution and victimization, most frequently in the Holocaust. Celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month is a great way to disrupt this trend and provide students with positive representations of Jewish culture. This is not just coming from us at JCRC. In November of this past year, the Massachusetts Special Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism released its final report after more than a year's worth of expert testimony and public comment. The report contains dozens of recommendations for combating anti-Semitism across the Commonwealth, including in K-12 schools. One such recommendation calls on schools and districts to partner with community organizations to implement programming for Jewish American Heritage Month beginning this school year in May. As we approach May, we wanted to provide schools with ideas and resources that you can use to celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month in your communities, which brings me to our program for this afternoon. We are so thrilled to partner with the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History to showcase their exciting new curriculum, Stories That Shaped a Nation, Jewish Lives in America. And I am thrilled to introduce our featured speaker for this afternoon, Dan Osborne. Dan Osborne, EDD, is a history teacher, education researcher, and nonprofit professional who specializes in designing multimedia humanities curriculum and teacher professional development experiences. He is the curriculum developer for the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History, Stories That Shaped a Nation. Dan is also the executive director of Project Mosaics, an education nonprofit dedicated to expanding the representation of Jewish history, culture, and identity in humanities classrooms. So Dan is going to spend some time taking us through the curriculum and some ways that it can be put to use, some examples, some case studies, and then we are going to have time for audience Q&A at the end, which you can access via the Q&A button either at the bottom of your screen, or if you don't see it right away, it's probably under the little three dots tab that says more. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to throw it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Spencer. It's really my pleasure to be here and to be in conversation with so many members of the greater Boston community, those who are working in schools and those who deeply care about and are invested in what transpires in schools. Today, I'm going to be walking us through stories that shaped a nation. It's a few goals that I have for the conversation that we're going to have about this curriculum. Firstly, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Weitzman Museum, I do want to start off with a brief overview of the institution and some of the themes of American Jewish history that are really salient and on display in the exhibits at the museum, and that really also serve to inform the arc, the themes, and the orientation of Stories That Shaped a Nation. We'll then do a little overview so everybody here has the opportunity to learn about the pillars that uphold the curriculum and some of the big themes, concepts, and through lines that are woven into each of the lessons in the curriculum. Obviously, we don't have time to go through the entire curriculum in a comprehensive manner or in an immersive way that I would love to. For those of you who are working in schools, perhaps that is something that we could do at another time. But what I do want to do is zoom in on some of the lesson resources and activities in order to give all of you a flavor of what it is that you'll find in Stories That Shaped a Nation in terms of the student-facing content and materials and some of the voices, the narratives, and the perspectives that we really try to illuminate and bring to the attention of students through this work. The big objectives for today are to provide everybody here with an introduction to the curriculum so that you walk away better understanding and informed about the themes, issues, and voices that are found across each of the lessons in the curriculum. And then also, I want to be able to discuss the value that this curriculum has in a broader ecosystem of resources, of curricula, of professional learning opportunities for teachers and students in terms of representing Jewish people, Jewish identity, and Jewish culture in schools in ways that can truly serve the goals that Spencer's already outlined, but also some broader perennial goals of K-12 teaching and learning, which is cultivating student inquiry, critical thinking, and also thinking about the role that these lessons can play in helping students develop the skills and dispositions for active citizenship. So the questions that we're going to be trying to answer today are simply, what are the themes, issues, and topics central to understanding Jewish experiences in U.S. history? And how can teaching about American Jewish experiences foster a more inclusive and pluralistic curriculum and classroom environment? So to start, I want to share a little bit about the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History. It is a rather unique institution. It's the largest of its kind, a museum located in the heart of Philadelphia that is dedicated entirely to the study and teaching of American Jewish experiences from the first arrival of Sephardic Jews in North America in the early 17th century up through the budding decades of the 21st century, our contemporary reality. And in doing so, the Weitzman Museum strives to weave and integrate Jewish experiences into that normative account of US history that perhaps is well known and taught at other museums around the country, but doesn't always necessarily call attention to the Jewish dimensions and the Jewish contributions of life in North America and the United States. The Weitzman Museum is also a Smithsonian affiliate museum. I think that is absolutely worth noting as well. For all of us in Massachusetts, and while I'm speaking on behalf of the Weitzman today, I'm also currently in the Commonwealth. We're all familiar with the Freedom Trail and all the markers of American history and revolutionary history here in Greater Boston and throughout the Commonwealth. The Weitzman Museum, similarly, is located not just in Philadelphia, but across from Independence Mall, home to the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution were drafted. I think that really speaks volumes to the way in which Jewish people are not marginal to or far removed from some of these stories that later this year, for the 250th anniversary of the United States, we as a whole nation will be celebrating. And we can celebrate it with an understanding of the continued and sustained presence of Jews in North America since prior to the founding of the country. So I want to share a little bit about some of the big themes, narratives, and ideas that the museum as an institution strives to bring to the attention of visitors. I want to start with a short quote from historian at UCLA, David Myers, who writes that throughout history, they, meaning Jews, have been a people in movement. And so much of the stories that are told at the Weitzman are stories of Jews moving across the world through expulsion, through seeking of opportunities, through seeking of religious liberty. The museum starts with exhibits that focus on the first Sephardic arrivals to North America in the 17th century, who were fleeing the colony of Brazil and found sanctuary in New Amsterdam. The museum really emphasizes so much of the stories of Jewish history in North America that aren't always featured in our collective understanding. Stories of Jewish life in colonial North America, again, where you see communities emerging in cities like New York, Newport, Philadelphia, and across the Eastern Seaboard. So much of what the museum also strives to bring attention to is the religious freedom that Jewish people have found in the United States as the US has attempted to create a more perfect union. That story of sanctuary, of safety, of the ability to practice Jewish life openly, while at the same time also dealing with the realities of anti-Semitism, is something that is really central to the Weitzman's identity as an institution and the narratives that we bring attention to with our audiences. And when we think about the exchange of letters between the Jewish community in Newport, Rhode Island, and President George Washington in 1790, we often emphasize at the museum how the promise that in this newly formed country there would be bigotry given no sanction, that this was a promise being made at the same time that in the Russian Empire, the Pale of Settlement was being established. And at no point in Europe, when Washington was writing this promise, were Jews emancipated throughout the continent. The story continues with more movement, more examples of Jewish people fleeing persecution, seeking opportunity, arriving at the shores of the United States with some of the familiar accounts of 19th and early 20th century migration. And we also strive to really tell a complex, multifaceted story of Jewish peoplehood, looking at the multiple subsequent waves of Jewish migration and arrival to the United States, calling attention to those Jews from the Soviet Union, from Iran, from Cuba, from elsewhere, who also have continued to play a large role in deepening the roots that Jewish people have in North America and widening the scope and impact of Jewish contributions to life in the United States. As David Myers reminds us, Jews have engaged in a constant process of cultural interaction with the societies in which they lived, drawing from and reshaping the habits and values of the surrounding world, and doing that by balancing an engagement with preservation of distinctive traditions of the Jewish community. And the museum really focuses on the ways in which Jewish values have been brought to the fore in American life through collective responsibility, through Jewish efforts to welcome the stranger in the United States, through human dignity for all being a core part of Jewish communal life and Jewish collective organizing and activism, Tikkun Olam and attempts for repairing the world and social justice in this US context. And also Simcha. My friends and colleagues often talk about the need to balance Jewish oi with Jewish joy. And we also try to shine a light on the ways in which Jewish life in the United States is replete with stories of joy and rejoicing. And as we try to engage our audiences with these various accounts of Jewish life over the course of centuries across an entire continent, we think about, and we're often reminding ourselves and our audiences, that there's never been one Judaism, only Judaisms. Never one type of Jew or Jewish identity, only Jews and Jewish identities. And that diversity of Jewish peoplehood is central to the work done at the Weitzman and really does spill over and translate into the types of diverse accounts that found themselves into stories that shaped a nation, the curriculum that I'm here to talk about for the remainder of our time together. Stories That Shaped a Nation was born out of a couple realizations at the Weitzman. It emerged in the aftermath of 2020 and the COVID epidemic, where, as you can likely imagine, it was a bit of a challenge getting foot traffic in a museum. And a brick and mortar institution that tells stories by enticing people to come and walk through its halls, well, it's hard to accomplish that in a period of staying at home and social isolation. And when one of our main audiences is classroom teachers and also their students, we recognized that we needed to find other ways to tell these stories, to broadcast them to wider audiences. And as the name of the organization, the institution is, we're the National Museum of American Jewish History. And as a national institution, a curriculum that is digital, that is free and available to educators around the country means that we are able to take the stories that have been told to our in-person museum visiting audiences, and we're able to bring them to audiences that perhaps may never step foot in the museum, but who nonetheless are deserving of high quality teaching resources and are deserving of having the opportunity to tell meaningful, relevant, and compelling stories in classrooms around the country. So those are some of the reasons why Stories That Shaped a Nation, Jewish Lives in America came into existence. For those of you who are interested in multitasking, you can listen to me and also visit the website that houses the curriculum, JewishAmericanStories.org. And there you'll find the first 16 lessons in this ever-growing lesson series that we've developed. We've done this over the last year and a half or so. We launched the curriculum at the start of this school year. We were really fortunate to have teachers piloting it around the country, and we've been collecting data on the ways in which the intervention of these lessons in their classroom has also contributed to changing perceptions and attitudes about Jewish people broadly, and also Jewish peers in school environments. We're really enthusiastic about some of the early results that we're seeing coming out of that pilot study. Stories That Shaped a Nation consists of 16 lessons, all of which are designed to be self-contained and modular for teachers who perhaps don't have the time, the inclination, or the ability to implement all of them. So each one is written to be a self-contained lesson that could be sequenced as a unit or could be interspersed throughout the school year. The nature of the topics that we deal with allows for Jewish peoplehood to be consistently woven into the entire arc of an academic year in a US history class, because we're dealing with the presence of Jews in colonial North America, in the Revolutionary period, the early Republic, the turn of the 20th century, up through the 21st century. And because of that, we're really striving to avoid compartmentalizing where Jewish stories are heard, so that they're not an afterthought, so that they're not seen as separate from US history, but in order to ensure that they're really truly folded into the entire arc of a school year. As we were developing the curriculum, and as I should say, as we continue to develop it, because the 16 lessons that we have now will be 20 lessons by the start of the next academic year. We're continuing to diversify the themes, topics, and issues, and we're continuing to ensure that we're listening to, being responsive to students, parents, and educators as well. But as we drafted this first batch of lessons, we did so with a number of partner organizations, many of whom contributed some of their digital resources, be it films or audio clips, some of whom were kind enough to provide us with primary source materials, pedagogical approaches, or really regional knowledge of different schools, different districts, different frameworks and sets of standards around the country. And as we were authoring the curriculum, we did our due diligence and we referenced every single state social studies framework in the country to ensure that we found areas of overlap and alignment, so that the lessons that we've created and have published are suitable, are developmentally appropriate, and are standards aligned for any teacher around the country. So as I've already indicated, one of the major objectives of Stories That Shaped a Nation is to weave Jewish voices and experiences into the broader history of the United States, so that Jewish dimensions can be taught in such ways that they amplify and complement other stories of struggles, hopes, aspirations that are already being taught in our US history classrooms, but not always in ways that allow for Jewish hopes, fears, struggles, and aspirations to be taught. And as we've drafted this first set of lessons, lessons that deal with questions of Jewish identity, Jewish diversity, questions of what it means to be a diasporic community, Jewish connections to the state of Israel, questions of anti-Semitism, of Jewish participation in civic life in the United States, on and on and on. As we drafted these lessons and continue to publish more moving forward, we've always drawn from various frameworks, multicultural and culturally affirming frameworks, frameworks that promote social and emotional approaches to teaching and learning, so that we're having students wrestle with these broader perennial themes and issues in social studies classrooms, questions of identity, diversity, community, otherness, and humanity. Things that are the sorts of staples in any social studies teacher's classroom that can also be ways to have natural on-ramps for bringing in more and diverse stories of Jewish people. I want to talk a little bit about some of the pillars that uphold the curriculum. Every single lesson across the ones that we've written and in the ones we will draft moving forward is created with a windows and mirror approach, where we always want students, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, to be able to hold up a mirror to see themselves and have themselves honored, respected, and valued in the curriculum, and also to look through a window to see beyond themselves, to be able to witness, encounter, understand, and discuss other people. So we really see the curriculum as not only being a window into Jewish lives and Jewish stories, but also being a place where all students can wrestle with these questions of who they are, what they value, what their civic identity looks like. So that way we're creating bridges across communities and not only offering a glimpse into Jewish life in the United States. We're deeply invested to focusing on the diversity of Jewish peoplehood. And as I move forward a little bit and get to some of the kind of zoom in case studies that I want to call attention to, you'll see the diversity of Jewish perspectives, opinions, voices, identities is really a centerpiece to the curriculum. We really want to emphasize the agency of Jewish people as active contributors to life in the United States, be it civic life, be it cultural life, be it other forms of active participation and meaningful contributions to life in America. As I've already said, joy is a consistent part of what we try to bring into the conversations, but we also recognize that no story of Jewish people, whether it's in the United States or elsewhere, would be complete and would meet the needs of our current moment if we're not also talking about anti-Semitism and bigotry in the United States. But we do that in multiple ways, where we focus on the resilience and the resistance of Jewish people in the face of anti-Semitism. So we're confronting the realities of this particular form of hate, while also ensuring that students are able to see Jewish people as acting, responding, and having agency in the face of anti-Semitism. We focus on stories of anti-Semitism and the ways in which Jewish people have been targeted for hate, harassment, and other forms of discrimination. We also want to call attention to these questions of allyship, of solidarity, of mutual investment in the welfare and struggles for justice and equality. And this is yet another theme that consistently upholds the curriculum and spirals across lessons. It is not enough to only talk about the resilience, the resistance, the agency, and the solidarity struggles of the past. We also have a number of activities, of lessons, of opportunities for dialogue and inquiry that invite students to not only think about how they have a civic identity, how they can be empowered change makers, but we also really invite students to practice these skills in kind of safe environments where they can nurture their dispositions for active and meaningful participation in a pluralistic democracy. I now want to zoom in on some of these dimensions. It's not enough for me to come and share what the curriculum is designed to do in the abstract. I want to show you some of the activities, some of the resources, as much as time permits. And dare I say, I've overplanned, so we may not get to every zoom in strategy or resource that I anticipated getting to today, but I do want to give you a little taste and flavor of what would be encountered in the curriculum. I want us to start by looking at windows into Jewish diversity. Every single lesson is going to emphasize some aspect of Jewish diversity. There's 4 that at the very least, this is the core primary objective: helping students understand and define Jewish peoplehood in one lesson, explicitly talking about and centering the questions of what does it mean to be racially, ethnically, geographically, linguistically, and in other ways diverse as Jewish people in the world. When we talk about Jewish cultures and diasporic identities, differences in diversity will also come up. And also in the lessons dedicated to multiple waves of Jewish immigration, we're focusing on diversity in political and cultural experiences, and also geographic diversity. I want to just focus initially on three different components of two different lessons. The lessons We Belong at the Table, centering Jewish diversity, and Come Ye Wanderers, waves of Jewish immigration. We'll start with the first two activities from the We Belong at the Table lesson, which are embedded in a more comprehensive lesson. So what I really am doing right now is just picking out small samples from lessons so you can get a sense of what students would encounter. What I've done for the sake of this presentation is taken about a third of the images found in a gallery walk exercise. For those of you familiar with this pedagogical approach, it's when teachers hang up images in a classroom and transform that learning space into a sort of museum exhibit or art gallery. And these images that you see here are just but a sliver of those that we include in this lesson, inviting teachers to have students move around the classroom, annotate images, raise questions, make their own observations, engage in their wonders and curiosity around questions of Jewish diversity. Students are invited through this gallery walk to wonder what types of diversity they see on display here, to raise questions about things that are confusing, they don't understand, that might be new and surprising. And in doing so, it invites students to start the process of learning about Jewish diversity with their own keen eyes as observers who are attentive to detail, who are thinking about how they respond emotionally and what resonances they see in these images, and also to think intellectually. What are they noticing that perhaps is adding nuance and new dimensions to their understanding of Jewish diversity? It's a rather simple activity with lots of visual language and symbols on display, but also one that invites lots of different types of learners into the conversation. It's not starting with the text-heavy approach to understanding Jewish diversity. And also, for the sake of the audience that I have here, for those of you who are in the know, there's at least 3 individuals on the screen who are currently residents of the Commonwealth. So there's a lot of diversity on display in this exercise in the lesson, but also there's a little bit of geographic biases towards Massachusetts as well. So I want to now move to another segment of this lesson, which is focusing on not only diversity of Jewish peoplehood, but also this question of cultural blending, cultural diffusion, and cultural hybridization. And rather than hearing from me, I actually want to show you one of the films that's embedded in the lesson that students would be exposed to as they're wrestling with these questions of in what ways are Jewish people diverse, and in what ways do we see cultural blending happening. All of the video or all the still images that you see right here are actually screen grabs from videos from the film series We Belong at the Table, which focuses on Jewish diversity in Greater Philadelphia. So all the people you see here are neighbors to one another, but have very different stories to tell about who they are as Jews. And I want to start by showing a video featuring Jackie Jonas as she talks about who she is as a Jewish individual and how this intersects with her identity as a Black Southern woman.
Those of us who don't look Jewish are Jewish, and that we've always been here. You don't get a food tradition this rich and this intense and this complex in 15 years or 100 years. You get that across generations, right? So the journey of this religion out of what we call the Middle East now and into the rest of the world is written on the plate. It's written on the plate. And the journey of other people into this religion is written on the plate. So we belong at the table, I think, is a way for people to understand that and to broaden their conception of who we are as a people. So the intersection between Black Southern women and Judaism is in hospitality, in this desire to gather people and to use food as a love language and to entertain, but not just entertain. It's not like a dog and pony show. It really is an expression of love. If I'm not cooking for you, I don't love you. And so the first thing I do when I know that someone's going to be my friend is I cook for them. And if I never cook for you, then you're in another circle. But it's a very Southern thing. And so that was my hook into Judaism, really. Because I don't think I could be part of a tradition that didn't have that.
So I wanted to show that clip because it's one that, as we've gone through the piloting process and as we've been working with teachers around the country since the summer of 2025 through now, that video in particular has served as a really robust conversation starter, both with educators, adult learners, and also with students for whom, in many instances, there was a lack of understanding that there are Jews of color, that there is racial complexity and intersecting identities amongst Jewish people. And also because of the emphasis on food and foodways and what food means in terms of cultural traditions and evolutions, what food means in terms of who we invite to our table and who's present with us, how we nourish ourselves and our souls and our bodies, how we engage in generosity and selflessness. These sorts of conversations have been coming up again and again in work with teachers and students. And it's been an incredibly accessible and oftentimes humorous on-ramp for these conversations that sometimes can feel a little esoteric or hard to kind of ground in concrete examples if one doesn't necessarily have a deep familiarity with some of the scholarship in Jewish identity and Jewish culture. The last example of exercises or resources from the curriculum focusing on Jewish diversity comes from the lesson focused on waves of migration and arrivals to the United States. And when students are exposed to this video, they will have already been learning about and thinking about these questions of what push people from a country of origin, what pulls them to another place, what challenges and opportunities individuals, immigrants, Jewish refugees have or may continue to experience upon arrival in the United States. So students are thinking about these broader questions that have a lot of deep implications and resonance for understanding the diversity of the peoples who inhabit and populate the United States. They're doing it with Jewish examples and Jewish voices. And they're doing it in ways where they're able to look in the eyes an individual who perhaps they otherwise wouldn't have known about. They're able to hear an actual voice from a particular person. And they're also able to expand their understanding of where Jews have come from, where they have settled in the United States, and what the process has been like for them as they've acculturated, as they've made sacrifices, as they have attempted to safeguard and cherish parts of their identity that might feel vulnerable as people who are refugees or migrants. So the example that I'm sharing from the curriculum is the short film Rebuilding in Tehrangeles, produced by Project Mosaics, that I think is really relevant in this moment as it speaks to the Persian Jewish community in California and some of the reasons why they came to the United States and what it's been like for them. So I want to take a few minutes to watch this film to, again, give you a sense of the stories that shaped a nation that we want students to have access to.
This is my parents in Iran. My mom is pregnant with me. She's pregnant with me and my dad. Everything was quiet and happy. They had no reason to leave. They had no clue what was waiting for them. I wanted to share the Persian Jewish story. I believe that story has not yet been told and it needs to be shared. My parents made enormous sacrifices. This is my dad holding me. He has so much love and devotion in his eyes. We left in 79 and we went from Iran to Israel and then to New York City. Then we came to LA. What most immigrants do is they travel in herds. And because of that, we have the support system. Los Angeles had this huge influx of Iranians in the late 70s, early 80s. We were living in the same apartment with about 5 other families. Imagine you're a 30-year-old man and suddenly you have to start from the beginning. And my dad never complained, even with all his difficulties that he faced. I watched my father working so hard. Here he is again, going back to school. He still had that vision of rebuilding his life in America. Finally, it wasn't until I was 8 years old, my dad always said, I bought this house. I didn't know how I was going to pay for it the next month. And throughout the whole journey, he never sacrificed his Jewish identity. Living in America, people, even though they were Jewish, they didn't celebrate the Jewish holidays the way my family did. Friday night, it was we're going to my grandparents' house. We laughed, we danced. Our Friday night dinners were the highlight of the week. And that's why it was so strange for me, even though I went to a Jewish school. What do you mean you guys don't have Shabbat dinner? Growing up in Jewish day school, there were many moments where I felt as the outsider, and my parents were so adamant to hold on to the values and the way of living in Iran. This is me. For Persians, I was like the American girl, the California girl, but I was seeing how my friends that weren't necessarily Persian were living and what freedoms they had. For example, sleepovers. I was always the girl that got picked up, and sleepaway camp, forget about it. It was just very different, and it was at times hard to digest, especially when the other side, it looks more fun. I'm definitely like a child of the 80s. Madonna, Duran Duran, all the John Hughes movies. You have the watchful eye in the Persian Jewish community. You have the support, but at the same time, there are restrictions. They tie your feet up. I got asked out to junior prom with a boy, and before I could answer to him, I had to go and ask my dad's permission. His first response was, absolutely not. What are people going to say? And, this debate went back and forth, and finally he said, so long as I go and I meet his parents, you're good to go. My dad got to know his parents and realized, okay, they seem normal, and he gave me the green light, and I went. 20 years later, I ran into the gentleman. We were parting ways. He turned around. He's like, you have the coolest dad. And I said, yeah, he's pretty cool. I have to remember, not just all the hard work that went into building a life for us, how much of their belief system they had to do away with to have things be more fluid and easy for us. My parents are so grateful for this country that gave them this second opportunity. But at times, the values are extremely conflicting and challenging. My parents held on to their core values. I struggled, and looking back, I'm so grateful for that because I knew where I belonged. And it really gave a foundation of who I am. What I see is the Jewish story of resilience. We're not going to be victims. You can take away as much as you want from us. We're going to still continue rebuilding.
So in showing this video, I want you to all get a real sense of the sorts of depth and emotional sophistication and complexity that we're communicating to students with the resources that we've brought into this curriculum. Calling this a video that exposes students to Jewish diversity feels inadequate in saying all that it accomplishes. You really get these kind of grassroots, intimate portrayals of daily life and some of the ethical, moral, and cultural dilemmas facing Jewish people in America, particularly those who migrated to the United States. I'm going to move a little bit faster for the sake of time, but I wanted to give you a little glimpse into how anti-Semitism is addressed in the curriculum. It is something that is found overtly or implicitly or explicitly in almost every lesson. However, we have 3 different examples of lessons dedicated entirely to the study of anti-Semitism. One focusing on anti-Semitism historically in the United States, one focusing on contemporary anti-Semitism, and another that looks at anti-Semitism in relation to what it means and its implications for life in a democratic society. In one of the lessons focusing on anti-Semitism as a, quote, shape-shifting virus, we asked students to wrestle with multiple definitions of what anti-Semitism is, and to look at one example in particular from Bret Stephens, in which he refers to it as a shape-shifting virus, and really emphasizes the sort of conspiratorial nature of anti-Semitism. And this definition provides students with a lens through which to look at a multitude of more recent contemporary examples of conspiratorial thinking directed at Jewish people. Whereas when we focus historically, we also want students to have that lens in mind, not only to understand what Bret Stephens has to say about anti-Semitism today in the 21st century, but also to think about what it has looked like over the course of US history. This is an early 20th century political cartoon that we introduced to students, again, engaging them in the ability to do visual analysis, to do close reading of texts, to engage with a range of primary source materials, and to think about how they see these tropes, these narratives and stereotypes of Jewish people playing out across time. And in this particular example, from a wider resource set of historical examples of anti-Semitic literature and propaganda, we see this idea of Jewish deviousness, Jewish untrustworthiness on display here. And it's one that we have students see playing out over time, a trope that is recycled and reappearing as opposed to limited to just this one example. As I indicated already, when we focus on anti-Semitism and Jewish resilience to anti-Semitism in the curriculum, we also complement that with a series of lessons focusing on allyship. We use the civil rights movement as one case study of allyship and solidarity. We have multiple different lessons focusing on Jewish involvement in the civil rights struggles. We have students start by thinking about the contemporary world with a series of reflection and discussion prompts, whether they know anybody who's ever attended a protest or a demonstration, thinking about not just themselves and their actions or their civic identity, but whether there's anybody in their orbit who is doing things that result in involvement in this sort of civic activity. We also then want to turn it back on students to see if they've participated in this type of civic engagement as well. We then introduce definitions of allyship and solidarity, and then have them think again in these ongoing reflection prompts over the course of the first portion of this lesson, They know people who have supported another community, not just to be concerned with an issue, but to think about who they are as allies in solidarity with other communities. We ask students if they themselves are those who are acting in solidarity. And we have them wrestle with this question of whether or not they think activism can change the world, really helping them tease out and critically evaluate their understanding of all the different types of engagement tools at their disposal and the relative merits of any given particular engagement tool. We then use those kind of broad or general questions where students think about themselves, and then we move towards the civil rights movement, drawing from their previous knowledge about the civil rights movement, but then using assets and primary source materials from the Weitzman's own collection, this one in particular from the March on Washington, asking them to think about the intersection between critically thinking about allyship and solidarity, and then also learning how to read primary sources with intentionality. For all the history or social studies teachers with us right now, you all know as well as I do that primary sources are staples in classrooms, and that part of introducing them to students is helping them learn how to read and how to extract relevant information to help them better understand the time, place, and circumstances in question. And for this particular reading, we want students to try to understand how, by scanning this document, they can see allyship on display. And one quick and seemingly obvious way is to simply look at the names of individuals who gave remarks at the March on Washington, where you see a number of individuals who are rabbis who spoke prior to and also after Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We don't want students to just think about arbitrary reasons why Jewish people contributed to the civil rights movement, but to connect it to Jewish values, for students to understand the interplay between Jewish values and solidarity. And then we introduce them to Rabbi Prince, the individual who spoke alongside Martin Luther King at the March on Washington, providing them with the opportunity to think about Jewish themes and values as they play out in his speech, having them annotate and underline the actual transcript of his speech, while also listening to an audio recording of his remarks on that day in 1963. We also, and for the sake of time, I won't be showing these videos, I apologize, but we also show another video from a community in Alabama, a synagogue community that had a bomb planted at the synagogue that fortunately enough did not detonate, but was an example of how the community was targeted by hate groups and white supremacist groups for their involvement in the civil rights movement. We want students to go from that big story of the leaders of the civil rights movement and rabbis who participated, and also get down to the local level. What did it look and feel like to be a congregant at a synagogue that was being targeted for bombings because of the involvement of other congregants in the civil rights movement? I want to take the last 10 minutes to bring Spencer back into the conversation to hear some of the questions that emerged as I shared a little bit about the Weitzman, about the rationale behind Stories That Shape a Nation, as I shared a little bit about the pillars that uphold each of those lessons, and as I gave you a brief but hopefully meaningful taste and sample of some of the resources found in the curriculum. But there's a last parting comment before we bring Spencer back. I just want to say that one of the underlying goals in all of what I just shared is to help students and teachers alike value complexity, value the complexity of Jewish peoplehood, value the complexity of these issues around anti-Semitism, around immigration, around contributions to American society. And the complexity begins in the 17th century with Jews with names like Gomez and Lopez, from the Sephardic community that came to North America first. And it continues into the 21st century. And we really want complexity, diversity of Jewish people, and the interplay between Jewish values and Jewish participation in democratic life to be what spurs on the use of these lessons in classrooms, because they're invaluable concepts that I think all students are deserving of having access to. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I welcome Spencer back to have a little Q&A and open dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm going to let you take a breath while I remind folks that you can ask questions via the Q&A function, either at the bottom of your screen, or you hit that little more button and then you'll see Q&A. The first question that I have is just a very sort of simple and logistic one, which is what are the age groups that this curriculum is designed for?
Yeah, so while I may have said K-12 education in passing, the lessons are designed for primarily for use in both middle and high school settings. So we really had, looking at the 50 state frameworks around the country and trying to triangulate where we could have the greatest impact, a lot of the lessons, particularly those around identity, diversity, membership, and belonging, are really targeting 8th grade classrooms. And then many of the more kind of historically oriented ones are for a 9th or 10th grade US history class. So it'll depend a little bit on whether we're talking about early America or kind of the post-Civil War America. But we really do have upper middle school and then US history classrooms as our primary audiences.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think that is actually a great segue into my next question, which sort of ties back to something that you and I were talking about actually before we started this webinar, which is, schools have very limited time and bandwidth. And, unfortunately, curricular space is quite literally a zero-sum game. And you sort of talked about this throughout your presentation, but I'm hoping you can sort of tie it all together in your response to this question, which is how does this curriculum enable schools to hit core content areas, to build sort of basic competencies that they're trying to nurture in students? I think one of the biggest things that I can imagine schools thinking of when they first hear like, oh, there's a Jewish American history curriculum being, well, we don't really have time to fit in Jewish American history amongst all the other things. So I'm hoping you can speak a little bit to that.
Yes. So we did not write with the expectation that all the lessons would be taught sequentially, as though teachers just happen to have 3 extra weeks at their disposal to talk about all the lessons in question. So that's why we really wanted to focus on the intersection between Jewish voices and stories and staples of US history classrooms already. So Jews in the American Revolution, Jews in colonial America, Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement, topics that are going to be hinge points in a classroom where teachers are going to want to spend a lot of time helping students really immerse themselves in those topic areas. And also, we really were deliberate about the skill development that comes through many of these. We really did not want to have something that felt like it would be tacked on at the end of the school year or only appropriate for a holiday or something where it feels like you're suspending your typical goals and objectives in the classroom. And it's for that reason that we really leaned heavily into this idea of civic skills and dispositions and helping students develop their civic competencies and think about how historical individuals have acted and what power looks like in history, and also couple that with lots of exercises and activities that really tie up the historical lessons with a sense of students thinking about and learning how to discuss civilly and constructively issues they care about today, disagreements they have ideologically today, how to resolve that, how to navigate ambiguity and uncertainty. So that skill development often takes us away from the study of Jewish particular topics and allows for us to have the sorts of discussions and inquiry-based activities that could be transferable outside of the topics that we're focusing on. And then also, just as you saw with that very quick example of one piece of early 20th century propaganda, that close visual reading, the primary source analysis, this is something that's also really baked in time and again. So even if teachers don't necessarily have the inclination or the time to think about the history of anti-Semitism, maybe they are thinking about xenophobia and nativism in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And that image could serve teachers' interest in that topic as well, even if they're not thinking about the history of anti-Semitism in America. And we really do encourage teachers, and this is something we say in the professional development that we do directly with educators, is to find a question, a reading, a video, some resource or pedagogical approach from the curriculum. And if that's all you have the time or desire for, if that's all that's appropriate in your classroom, that is a way to make use of this curriculum. We want to save educators time, and we want to speak the language of educators. And hopefully you find something of value and of interest to your students. And if that's not a whole lesson or the whole curriculum, so be it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. This might be my own bias as a history major, or a former history major, but I firmly believe that like somewhere north of 80% of the skills and competencies that we are trying to nurture in students, we could do in history class and history class alone. So I think my next question, potentially my last, depending on how much time we have, is what is next for this curriculum? I was intrigued by you mentioning that, very soon there will be 20 lessons. What is on the horizon that schools can expect?
Yes, so the Weitzman is currently undergoing a physical transformation of the museum space itself with an exhibit dedicated to a story that I'm not going to tell too much about because I want people to go to the website and learn more, that relates to Jewish involvement in the American Revolution. So we'll be having a Jews in the American Revolution lesson that comes out. We have 2 lessons that are Holocaust related without interfering with or doing the work of other amazing Holocaust related resources out there. So one is focusing on Holocaust memory through memorials, allowing students to, again, think about symbolic representations and the narratives that we tell in public spaces, like the one that we tell in Boston through our New England Memorial. The other Holocaust related topic is focusing on the lives of survivors in the United States, not focusing on what they survived in the Holocaust, but what did it mean to immigrate, to rebuild, and to attempt to live with trauma in a very different context. We are also currently working on a lesson dedicated to Jewish involvement in contributions to American culture, with the history of comedy from the Borscht Belt to Hollywood, and the history of music from Tin Pan Alley to MTV being the 2 case studies. And then the last one is for teachers who are doing media literacy education, looking at the history of Jewish journalism in the United States, starting with the Yiddish press and moving up through the 21st century.
That all sounds fantastic, and potentially going to have to bring you back for 4 individual webinars to dive in deep into each of those, which nobody else may attend but me, but selfishly that's fine. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate all the work that you and the museum are doing, and all of the tremendous impact it's already having and is going to continue to have. Thank you to everyone who is here, whether you're watching this live or watching this later on in a recording. For those of you watching it live, we will send a follow-up email that has a brief survey we'd love for you to fill out, as well as obviously a link to the curriculum itself and where you can learn more about the Weitzman Museum and their phenomenal work. So thank you all so much for being here. Dan, thank you again, and have a great night, everybody.